All right, if everyone feels ready, I think we'll go ahead and get started because we've got a lot of great things to get through in not a huge amount of time. So people can continue entering, but welcome, good morning. Thank you for joining us on this second day of the second annual Team Research Symposium. My name is Dr. Hannah Torres. I'm the director of the Faculty Research Development Office at the University of New Mexico, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Bill Michener, Morgan. It's okay. Mindy Morgan and Dr. Mark Stone. And we are going to be talking about how to develop collaborative interdisciplinary teams. So I would say more and more, it's becoming well established that science is most effective when researchers from diverse disciplines come together and work on a collaborative project of overlapping interest. However, we also know that developing an effective interdisciplinary collaborative project can take more time. It can take more resources, more management and communication. And so today, our conversation is going to highlight some strategies and best practices for developing a collaborative research program. After each of our panelists introduce themselves, what we're going to do is open things up for discussion. So I do have a few planned questions, but I strongly encourage you to go ahead and throw your questions into the chat throughout, and we'll pull those in as the conversation goes, because we'd really like for this to be an interactive dialogue. So with that, I am going to pass it over to our panelists who are going to introduce themselves, share a little bit about who you are and what kinds of collaborative teams you've helped to establish. Bill, can we start with you?
Sure. So I'm Bill Michener, just recently retired from UNM, and I've been involved in lots of different fields. My initial training was in oceanography, which was a truly interdisciplinary program at the time, and that turned me on to physics, geology, chemistry, biology, statistics, remote sensing, and so on. So I started off with a very broad interest. And then I think that was really expanded when I went on sabbatical for a couple of years at the National Science Foundation and was given the opportunity to run the biocomplexity program there, which was a very large interdirectorate program that involved mathematicians, biologists, geologists, every sort of individual that's funded by NSF, including social behavioral economic scientists and so on. I have run now some 50 different NSF projects, and a couple funded by DOE, NASA, and NOAA. And about half of those were fairly large interdisciplinary programs involving teams. Most recently, let's say, of ecologists, economists, geologists, engineers, economists, and so on. So again, truly interdisciplinary. And I guess I would summarize the lessons that I've learned with just a few really quick bullet phrases. One, I found that success is really geared on having a bold, compelling vision, pulling together an exceptional team, following a smart plan, and we can talk more about that later, but having a good advisory board working with you so you can seek expert advice. For all of my large collaborative projects, I employ a working group model that was initially conceived of by the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. Next, maximize communication both within and outside the team. And this is really critical to success. Next, plan for sustainability of the project from the very beginning. And then last but not least, make every effort to have as much fun as possible, because these large collaborative projects are very challenging And to get buy-in from everyone, you really have to go out of your way to have fun. This may be taking your team to soccer games, baseball games, Meow Wolf, I've done that before, hikes, so on and so forth. So again, having fun is a big part of what makes these projects work. So that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Bill. We've already got a wealth of information. And I love that you brought up fun as a key component of team research, because it's not the first time I've heard that in this team research symposium. Yesterday, Dr. Ellen Fisher was saying the same thing. If your team's not having fun, then it's probably not going to be as productive as you're wanting it to be. Mindy, would you please introduce yourself and tell us a little about your experience building collaborative teams?
Yeah, hi everybody. It's good to be here. Thank you so much, Hannah, and also to Irene Gray and everyone who's put all this whole symposium together. I'm really excited to be a part of it. I was a part of it last year, and it's good to see it back. It's just so impressive. This whole and the interdisciplinary co-op in general is just, I'm just so excited to have it on campus and to be a part of what's making interdisciplinary research possible at UNM. So I am a professor in geography and environmental studies, and I am also currently the Kellogg Chair in Environmental and Food Systems. And that is part of my role as Director of Sustainability Studies, which is an interdisciplinary program here at the University of New Mexico that currently offers an undergraduate minor. And that is very much an interdisciplinary program. So we rely upon faculty throughout, not just the College of Arts and Sciences, but really throughout all the colleges to help offer that degree through electives that are being offered throughout the university. And one of the things that we have started in the past couple of years are research collaboratives. So in addition to offering undergraduate programs, we've started to want to build interdisciplinary teams for faculty that are interested in sustainability related initiatives. So if you look on the Sustainability Studies website, you will see that we currently have 2 research collaboratives, one in food systems and one called the Rio Grande Research Collaborative, which has been very much, it has 2 different projects related to it right now that are the 2, I think I would say, current interdisciplinary projects that I'm currently involved in. So let me just back up a little bit and say how I first initially got involved in interdisciplinary work. And that is before I was on a tenure track. So I started off at the University of Wyoming in a non-tenure track position because of my legal background. I got pulled in to start writing and helping with sort of policy assistance and legal sort of expertise at the Hobbs School of Environment and Natural Resources. And so I started doing sort of policy briefs and sort of being a part of interdisciplinary teams, doing work on coal bed methane and other issues of the day. And then before I knew it, I was an adjunct. And before I knew it, I was a part-time instructor. Before I knew it, I was a full-time instructor. And then I was interested in becoming a faculty member. And then I came down here in 2008 and became a tenure track professor in geography and environmental studies. And so I worked as a part of teams there. And then when I came down here, I started doing sort of a mix, because I was, as like many pre-tenure faculty, I wanted to make sure I could, get the job done and get publications out the door. So I started doing, sort of individual work on my own, but then I started getting very interested in doing sort of collaborative work on, related to sort of the issues of the day, related to climate change and, water scarcity here in the Rio Grande and the Rio Chama, tributary to the Rio Grande, talking to characters like Mark Stone, who was also starting off as a faculty member at the time. So I'll let Mark talk about our first, I still remember our first coffee together, Mark. And so we started working together really early on projects related to that. And so one of the projects that we have going now in the Rio Grande Research Collaborative very much tiers to the Transformation Network, which I know Mark is going to talk about, which is a large National Science Foundation Sustainable Regional Systems proposal that was recently funded. And we started that work sort of very early when I first returned back to UNM in 2017. I won't go into my long storied history of bouncing back and forth between New Mexico and Wyoming. But there's just a huge, body of work to be done, in our own watershed related to the social challenges, societal issues facing the ecological transformations happening in our own watershed in relationship to climate change and forest regime change and wildfire and water. So a lot of my interdisciplinary relates to that. So in addition to the Transformation Network, the other major interdisciplinary work I'm doing right now relates to an initiative that is supported by the Advance work and also the CREST grant and led by Caroline Scruggs, which is on water scarcity. And we're looking at the lived experiences of farmers and policymakers, looking at innovations within water governance related to that. So one really big project led by Mark Stone, and also one very small, relatively small project with 4 PIs and a handful of graduate students and undergraduates. So it's really fun to be working at 2 very different scales right now. And I'll stop there.
Great, thank you so much, Mindy. Mark, I think we've got a good lead in to your introduction. Can you please share a little about yourself and some of the projects that you've helped to establish?
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. And just to echo Mindy's comments about just being appreciative of having this opportunity. I'm really glad that this event exists as someone who really values team science. And yeah, I've worked with Mindy and Bill in the past, so it's nice to see them be the fellow panelists with them. Yeah, I was reflecting on it this morning, kind of my team science path. So that's what I thought I would take people down a little bit, because it's been an evolution. And with each step, there's the next level of challenges as you grow and increasingly interdisciplinary and with larger teams and whatnot. But I was reflecting all the way back to my master's work, actually, which was on climate change issues, and thinking about how that work was very multidisciplinary. That's kind of where my research experience began, where we had climate scientists, we had hydrologists like myself, we had economists, and each research group did their thing. We didn't meet, I never got to know the rest of the teammates. We did our thing, it went through a chain and we got it done. And I think it met the needs at the time, but it wasn't a very rewarding experience. And I certainly didn't learn anything about climate science or economics or anything else, or the broader picture. And then into my PhD studies, I focused on fish passage at hydroelectric dams, which required close collaboration with fisheries biologists. So it kind of was that next step. It was two different disciplines, and we needed to work together to a degree, but it was still kind of multidisciplinary. And then from there, I moved after my PhD work to the Desert Research Institute in Nevada, which, for those who aren't familiar, it's a large environmental nonprofit research organization that's part of the state of Nevada's system of higher education. And by necessity, at DRI, people are collaborative, and it is all about team science because it's a soft money institution, and it is very difficult to sustain yourself long-term with one-off, one PI type grants. So it was a really great fit for me because I like doing that kind of work across, on things like climate change impacts. And it was the right environment because out of necessity, people were collaborative or they moved on. They just couldn't be in that setting. So that's really where I embraced collaborative work. And then when I moved over to UNM almost 13 years ago now, time goes fast, and quickly connected with Mindy and others who were like-minded. And if I had like my one takeaway from experiences with team science is you have to work with people you like. If it builds off of the fun comment that Bill made. I mean, you'll have fun with people that you like, and if you're around people who you don't like, you're not going to have fun. So that relationship building component, and just finding people who are wired the way you are, that share, have a common shared vision, was something that I really deliberately sought when I came to UNM, and I felt all along that UNM has a great environment for that. I kind of joke about it that, compared to some of my colleagues at other universities that just bean count to the tiniest little gram. UNM's not very good at tracking anything, and therefore we're more mobile. I feel like it's always, I've never felt like I've had challenges working across schools, departments, colleges, because of course there's some bean counting, but the UNM seems to obsess about it less than some of my colleagues in places that are maybe considered more prestigious. We're prestigious in other ways. So I've found it to be a very collaborative environment. In my time here, I've just had some long arches of projects though. And that's, I guess, the way that it's worked nicely for me is that we've got kind of a common vision that my team of co-conspirators are working towards, and then you build teams for any specific opportunities that come up. So, in recent years, the ones that I've really been emphasizing or working hard on is one that we refer to as the Headwaters of the Americas, which is we have 10 partner universities in 8 different countries right now that are all focused on doing research around systems like the Rio Grande, where the primary water source is from high elevations, and then we have downstream ecosystems and communities that depend heavily on those waters. And as probably everyone on this call recognizes, those systems are very vulnerable to forces around climate change and other stressors in those systems, and the follow-on stressors such as wildfires. Another large one is led by Dr. Carrie Howell through the Center for Water and the Environment, which I'm associate director of. It's a large CREST grant that is really an interdisciplinary water effort that includes people from all over campus with different emphasis areas from the source to the tap and beyond, back to the receiving water, including water treatment technologies. So that one's a little bit more technical focused, but still quite interdisciplinary. And then the one that Mindy previewed is our latest effort, which is definitely pushing me to be a next level of team science leader, and that is what we refer to as the Transformation Network. So this was a recently funded NSF grant through the Sustainable Regional Systems Program. There were 2 funded across the country, and these only come up every 5 to 6 years. And ours is focused on resilience and resilience of regional systems across the Intermountain West. So we have 8 partner universities ranging from Washington State up in the Northwest to us down here in the Southwest, along with Tech and State and schools in Arizona, Colorado, and Utah. And really, taking a hard look at systems, at communities. Sorry, let me start over. At connections between rural and urban communities, and the stressors that they're facing with respect to climate change, shifting demographics, and other stressors, and thinking about how we can transform to sustainable regional systems. So it's a whole nother challenge, because now we've got 60 some team members and trying to get them all organized and headed in the same direction across these 8 different institutions. So that's the latest chapter that we're just beginning to write. That is definitely taking my team science, stretching my team science skills, and helping me to continue being challenged.
Thank you, Mark. So we are already getting some great questions in the chat. One of the things that I want to start to focus on in the conversation now is thinking about the team, because we have the idea of you want a team to be fun, and you want a team also to be diverse, yet you also want to have people who are like-minded and have a shared vision. So how do you make sure that you have the right people at the table? And there are some follow-up questions to that, like does a collaborative team need to take all interested researchers, or how do you deal with potential hostility towards the work or the direction that the work is taking? So is there anyone who'd like to jump in and start on that idea?
Well, I think there are 3 keys to a good team. One is, again, once you've decided on your bold, compelling vision and you know what you want to ultimately achieve, then it can be broken down into different work segments, and you can determine for each of those different work segments what needs to be done or accomplished over the period of performance. Once you do that, you can determine what expertise is needed. And usually I start off with an executive team that may be 4 to 6 individuals that I know are critical to making this project work. And typically there are people that maybe I've worked with before, but certainly I've got a high degree of confidence in them being able to do the work. Then to flesh out the rest of the team, and I've had teams as large as 120 individuals for EPSCoR, and then a couple of other projects as well. So the first thing is, of course, is you need the expertise. So you've got to identify what work needs to be done, and do you in fact have the expertise in order to do the work? NSF reviewers and everyone will be looking at this regardless of the funding agency. They will be looking to see, do you have the right people in place? Secondly is what I refer to as, excuse me, sandbox skills. And this goes back to kindergarten, you know, can the people play in the same sandbox together? You're going to be working with this group for probably 3 to 5 years, and in some cases, hopefully 10 or 15, if you can be renewed. So again, the ability for those people to get along with one another is key. And I always make sure that people are vetted by myself or members of the executive team. And oftentimes we'll, quote, have an informal interview with individuals to see whether or not they are going to work out with us. A great example is one of the earlier projects that I was involved in. It had to do with biodiversity, and I and the other team members recognized that we needed a visualization expert for biodiversity, and we didn't know anybody. So we did a Google search. We discovered this woman at Napier University in Scotland named Jessie Kennedy. We emailed her and said, hey, can we talk with you about a potential project? We met with her. She was just a terrific person, great personality. She loved flamenco dancing in addition to her scientific expertise. And we brought her on, and she was just an incredible success for the project. And then third, diversity is also very important as well, as you mentioned. And one of the things that, you know, we typically do as part of my projects is we'll identify, yes, people that can fill various roles, but then we will also look at the diversity. And this can be gender, institutional diversity, racial, ethnic diversity, so on and so forth. So again, you get different types of people that can really contribute. And even though I'm you know, started out as a biologist and moved into some other fields, I found that some of the best collaborators that I've worked with have been folks from the social behavior economic scientists, either geographers or economists, because of their broad, you know, breadth and depth of expertise in lots of different areas. So those I think are some of the real keys. And then again, communication is a way to get that team to sort of stay together and gel over time. So I'll stop here. I don't want to talk too much.
Thank you so much, Bill. Mindy, I wanted to send that question over to you as well, because I know we were chatting before we opened up the webinar, and you had some great tips. Do you want to share some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I think that, you know, it is when you're first trying to put some ideas together and you're thinking of putting together a team, and there are a lot of people that are potentially interested, and you're trying to figure out how well you're going to potentially work together. One of the things I like to say is, you know, it's good to date before you marry, you know, so before you actually get involved in something long-term, like maybe a 5-year, proposal and commit to something like a big, large NSF commitment, maybe you could try working on something as doable as like a conference paper, you know, together. And, you know, in the process of doing something relatively modest, you can learn a lot about your team. You can figure out whether or not people meet their deadlines on time, whether folks show up to meetings, whether people will be able to, you know, negotiate the challenges associated with coming up with a shared slide deck and, come up with, shared research questions together. And then I think you really do learn in microcosm, how well people are able to, deal with the same types of issues that you would deal with on a much larger scale associated with putting together a budget and all kinds of other issues that happen when it comes together, putting together a proposal. And I think there's always this balance of wanting to wanting to keep teams sort of energetically open, kind of all comers and letting folks kind of figure things out and kind of come and go. But I think there is something to be said also with them kind of digging in and kind of saying, okay, this is our group and we're going to move forward, because I think that it is difficult to build momentum until you kind of put together a core. So there's always a balance and there's always a trade-off associated with doing those things. But sometimes, committing to something like as simple as a conference paper and then just seeing who really digs in and does the work can be a good way to start.
That's great. That's a really good tip. And one of the things that I liked about what you were saying earlier too is that it's different from just networking or going out for coffee or getting to know each other, because there's a goal, there's a task that you're working on. So there could be people that you really love and enjoy as people, but you realize the dynamic just isn't necessarily there for working on a big team project. So I think that's really helpful.
There are a lot of really wonderful people out there that just aren't well suited to working in teams or just don't have the bandwidth to work in teams. As I think Bill pointed out, there are just a lot of people that for one reason or another aren't that well suited to it. And it just is what it is.
Did you want to add anything to that, Mark? Or
yeah, I've got a few thoughts. I'm going to start with that last part of like you said, there are a lot of great people out there, and I've had those experiences where you find out that getting into that working relationship, as Mindy was pointing out, turns out maybe you should just be friends, right? Maybe you shouldn't take it to that next level. That's okay, because you're just not compatible in a working space, and I've had that experience. And then on the flip side, not what was I say, just like different, kind of coming at it from a different approach than what Bill was suggesting, not in terms of right or wrong, but just kind of how it has played out for me is that, and I feel really fortunate in this way, and that I tend to work with kind of my my long-term trusted relationship. Most of my projects have been really ground up, and I think like what Bill is describing is like as a manager of something like the EBSCOR office, he would have a solicitation and build a team, which is a really important role. But my experiences have primarily come up the other way, where we have a large group of collaborators that have been working for decades now together, that have this great interrelated network where we try to figure out like, oh yeah, that person was once office mates with that woman, and this woman was once the advisor of this guy over here, and it's this crazy web. And then we're just looking for the next opportunity to take our ideas to the next level, and then we pull this team together strategically for that particular opportunity, but it's kind of within the group. Occasionally pulling someone in from the outside, like on our large transformation network, we pulled in 2 teams from the outside who I hadn't worked with before, and I went through some of the things like what Bill and Mindy were pointing out of kind of the reference checks, basically have people work with them. Were they good working in teams? Is this someone that we want to have on the transformation network? And it's worked out great, but you could tell the difference because we really had to be thoughtful about how to onboard them onto the process and make sure that they didn't feel like outsiders who were coming in late and that they weren't as like meaningful of a member to the team. We really had to be thoughtful about that and make sure that they knew that we valued their contribution, even though they were kind of in the family beforehand. But I think it's just kind of opposite directions to come at it, and it would depend on a lot of different things, including your responsibility. Like Bill was running a large office versus, in my case, it's more from the PI coming up from ground up.
great, thank you. Yeah, and I appreciate you mentioning that thoughtfulness of the process, because like Bill mentioned, you need to look at your team as a whole and make sure the expertise is there for the project or the task that's at hand. But you also don't want to just, tack someone on at the end because, oh, we don't yet have the person in this field, so we need to pull you in. So I appreciate that comment about the thought that you put into making sure team members feel valued. Another thing I've heard from many of you is the importance of communication. And one of the questions we've gotten in the chat is about what communication tools or apps, and I'll add to that also strategies, have you found most helpful to coordinate and communicate with interdisciplinary teams? Because with the workload everyone has, it seems easy for things to fall between the cracks.
Yes, I think, again, I've learned that over time that for every project, you really need to have a communication plan. I develop that in conjunction with the members of the executive team and my collaborators, and identify things like the frequency with which the executive team needs to meet. Oftentimes this is weekly or bi-weekly. The frequency with which our working groups need to meet, which is often monthly, possibly virtually via Zoom, and then maybe every 3 to 6 months in person. And I have to say there's no real replacement for in-person meetings, despite the fact that we've had to do that for the last couple of years. A lot of that trust and confidence and camaraderie is built through working face-to-face with people. And unfortunately, we've not been able to do that so well. And we've been forced to rely on things like, again, Zoom for meetings, possibly Slack channels. Email is still a great way to do it. Setting up listservs, again, so you can communicate broadly with the team. And sending out something like a monthly report or even a newsletter to your team can be important. Just keep them up to speed, share opportunities, share progress. And then as part of that, what I found that is very useful is one component of the communication is using what I call a stoplight analysis, which is looking at various components of the project in terms of what we promised to do. This may even include things like outputs, like publications, proposals that we propose to write, patents, things like that. And we keep a stoplight check on that. So, green if we're meeting our goals, yellow if we're just, slightly behind, or red if, hey, this is a problem area. And then those red light issues are ones that get discussed with the full team as well as part of the executive team. But again, identifying the frequency and then sticking to it is really key to keep people up to speed with what's going on. And I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Bill. Just one quick follow-up. Who would typically come in to lead the creation of something like a communication plan or a collaboration plan? Is it one of your team members usually, or do you sometimes have an outside facilitator come in to help with those kinds of things?
We've always done that internally. So like with the past project that I was involved in, I would have engaged with the associate director who's on this right now, Selena Keneally, as well as possibly members of the executive or management team to identify the best ways to communicate with various folks. And then, at least as part of EPSCoR, we've been fortunate to have an exceptional communication specialist for handling a lot of our external communication, Brittany Vanderwerf. So we've worked with her as well in terms of external communication. I've done a whole lot with bringing in external people to do this. I think there are some great resources that I can turn folks on to in terms of both managing projects and developing good communication plans, if you want to save that for later.
Great, Thank you, Bill. Mindy, Mark, do you want to add to that question about communication tools, apps, or strategies?
I appreciate Eva's shout out to Mark's Transformation Network Digest, and I'd be interested to hear Mark's thoughts. As he mentioned, we're working on a huge scale with the Transformation Network and trying a bunch of different strategies there. I'd be interested to hear his thoughts. But I will say a lot of it depends on scale of what you're trying to accomplish. I think that, obviously, communicate, we're all overtapped right now. And so, trying to keep things as efficient as possible is always great. And at the same time, I also want to put a shout out for unstructured time, because I think, Mark and I can attest to the fact that, our best ideas come at when we're just kicking around, having coffee together, and just hanging out and really talking about what we care about and riffing on thoughts and ideas. And that time is so important. And so, finding, and that is why getting together in person is really, key. And so I think that there's a balance to be made there of figuring out how to take advantage of the efficiency and making sure you build in some unstructured time for your teams, and you're not just always looking at metrics and deliverables. So I will just, those are my comments.
Yeah, mostly try not to be repetitive in the spirit of good communication. I'll try not to be overly repetitive. So I agree with everything that Mindy and Bill pointed out, and to just add a touch to those things, or to echo Bill's comment and Mindy's too, about like informal time together. For our big network, Transformation Network, for the first time ever, we've done everything virtual since this network has started. We'll finally be getting together next month. And I think our whole team, at least me, I cannot wait, especially for that informal time, just to be able to catch up with people as humans. And in terms of the more formal structures, yeah, I agree with everything that was said. Just to expand on the key and digest, we've been trying everything, and really we leaned heavily into Slack, and that's been a good platform for us. But we recognized pretty quickly that there's various levels of embracing of a new platform like that. Some people are all over it, others maybe not paying as close of attention to it or figuring out how to use that tool. Plus it just gets to be traffic. So that's when we came up with this idea of putting out a weekly digest. And to the question about sharing it, I'd be happy to share like an example of it, but it's really literally just an email that we have like nicely formatted that has recurring sections of, here are the meetings coming up for the week. Here are featured researcher, here's a featured project, here are some other webinars that are happening that are related to our work, here are some upcoming meetings, save the date, that kind of thing, that we're just putting out every week, so that if people haven't been able to keep up with everything that's happening, they know that come Thursday, they're going to have this digest that's going to help them kind of come back up to speed pretty quickly. So I'd be happy to share out like an example of that email if we could figure out a good way to do that across this group. And I feel like I did want to make one other point. We've learned with a network our size, we have to really think about internal versus external communication. So like the points that we were just making were all around internal communication, and that's really difficult. We're starting to get our rhythm, but now we're really starting to give a lot more thought of how do we communicate externally. And we're updating our website, of course, but also we're going to be putting together now a monthly outward looking email blast in order to make sure we're communicating with our stakeholders and just interested people. So I think that's a challenge as well. Thinking about those two components. Our digest is meant for our team, but now we're going to have a newsletter that's intended for our community.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's really important when the team starts to grow, thinking about who the audience is for different occasions. And I'll make a quick plug just because I have it next to me. I have no stake in this, but we've been talking about how nothing can replace in-person meetings. This book, Digital Body Language, I'm reading it now, and it's been really useful in helping to think through communication strategies with teams and power dynamics and all these kinds of issues. So I'd recommend into it if you're interested. Some discussion of how some strategies depend on scale. And one of the questions I see in the chat related to this is, are there best practices for small teams as compared to large, even multi-university teams? Or are best practices generic regardless of team? And maybe, Mark, we might start with you here if you have a response to this question.
Can take a stab, but I really want to hear Bill's answer on this. He's worked across so many scales for so many years that he's really the expert here. Well, at least I feel like I'm learning as I go. But yeah, I think there's a big difference in my experience. Like I pointed out, my scale has been growing over time, and I have really needed to develop some new skills and approaches to take something on at the scale that we're currently attempting. That said, some of it's trickling back down now. So I think there are things that I absolutely have to do with our current project that I should have been doing all along for some of my other projects. So having like a regular repeating communication channel, for example. So now I have Slacks for everything, right? All of my groups have Slacks. I put off taking on a new platform like that. So I do think scale really does play a big role. But you can learn across those scales as well. Things that work at small scale can help you understand how to do things at a bigger scale project, and those bigger things can help you think about how to run smaller teams well.
Thank you, Mark. Bill, do you want to share with us from your 50 plus NSF projects? What are your thoughts on this?
I think the challenge is the larger the project, for every magnitude of increase in dollars, you see almost an equivalent increase in the amount of administration that needs to take place, the amount of time that you need to spend on communication. So again, you can keep people engaged. And then I'll use this as a plug for project management. And that is, the bigger the project, the more attention you truly have to pay to project management. So some of the largest projects that I've been involved in, I've actually had to hire full-time project managers as well as accountants to track various pieces and parts of the project along the way. And some element of project management, though, is really key even for small projects. So I might take this opportunity to plug something that I discovered a while back, and I use this in a lot of the training that I do for faculty and postdocs and others. But there's this book, I don't know if you can see it. It's Project Management for the Unofficial Project Manager, and I can actually type it into the chat. And it's by Kogan, Blakemore, and Wood. And this is a very easy to read book that covers all the basics of project management. It gives you lots of great ideas for, again, how to track progress, how to communicate with difficult people on your project. A lot of the issues that I've seen show up in the chat are covered very well in this book. And if you compare it to what the professionals use, which is called PMBOK, the Project Management Book of Knowledge. And if you compare the width of them, you can see that the project management for the unofficial project manager is much, much smaller. It's much more accessible to everyone. And I think everyone that I know that is involved in any kind of a research project, from small 2 or 3 individuals all the way up to 100 or more, would benefit from using this particular, at least understanding a lot of the concepts in this particular book. So I will stop with that.
Great, thank you. It sounds like we should be starting a book club. I love how we just have them off on hand right here. Mindy, do you want to add something to that?
The only thing I'll add is, especially when you're working at these larger scales, think about some small wins you can do early. Think about something, really short that you can spin up. I've got, in fact, I've been meaning to follow up with Mark on some ideas about, some small things we can do just based on literature that we can get out the door early. Because it's going to take a long time, as you mentioned, with 60, folks on our team right now. The lift on getting some of these projects launched is just, it's taking us a while, and we're involving community partners because we're using a convergent research design in a lot of our research models. And when you do that and you start involving community partners in the design of the research and the design of the research questions, you know, that takes even more time. And you want to do that work, and at the same time, you also want to get peer-reviewed work out there as well. And so think about how to get what you can spin out quickly, how to stage productivity, and so you can have some early wins.
Thank you for that, Mindy. We've got a couple of questions also related to integrating students into research. So one question is, to support interdisciplinary research, when should we begin engaging students into the process, particularly thinking of Mark's story about building up different types of teams?
Yeah, I could take the first stab at that, because personally, I feel strongly about this one. I involve students from the get-go. So I'm the person who always has like 2 students in tow. I feel like it's so important to involve, especially if they've expressed some interest towards research or academics for their career. So yeah, I'm the type of person who shows up to every meeting with a couple of students of mine because I want them to be hearing these things. I want them to be part of our reading groups. I want them to, you know, share their perspectives. And when it comes to interdisciplinary work, I mean, I don't know, I think others have probably had this experience. Students are much better at it than we are, no matter how hard we try. Most of us still come from really strict disciplinary backgrounds, and we're always like trying to go to that next level. Versus students that I'm working with now and on my team, they so quickly make these connections because they're not so entrenched in one area or the other. And they bring insights that I often don't see because they're not as so like in the rut of the discipline. So personally, I involve students from concept through the entire process and don't let them sleep.
Thank you. Mindy?
I just want to echo that Mark is great at this, and also, you know, Mark's students bring a lot of passion, and also, you know, I think that, you know, one of the reasons why our students are great at this is they do this in their classes all the time, and they enrich and they enrich it. So I agree, bringing them in early and often. And I also want to put out a particular shout out for undergraduates. We have a wonderful undergraduate research model here at UNM, and we're building it out more and more all the time. One of the great things about undergraduates are, you know, they will do pretty much anything as a part of a project, you know. So as a part of the project that we have right now with Caroline and working on water scarcity and lived experience in the Rio Grande, we're actually going to be looking for an undergraduate researcher here pretty soon. So if any of you know of anyone or happen to be an undergraduate on this right now, we'll be looking for someone, and that person will be helping us to transcribe the interviews, but they'll also be a member of the research team, meeting with us weekly, talking with us about what we're learning and helping to do some recruitment. So they'll be learning kind of soup to nuts what it looks like to be doing this research, and that'll be a great experience for them. So I just feel like bringing them onto the team and giving them a window into the whole experience is a great opportunity.
Thank you, Mindy. And I also just want to express my thanks to all of you who are putting such fantastic questions in the chat. I'm jumping around a bit back and forth, but trying to get to as many as I can here. And Bill, I'll go to your thoughts on that too, but I also want to add into the mix. A question came in about engaging community partners into teams as well. So thoughts on the difference between recruiting and managing community partners compared to faculty team members. So I'm thinking, since we're talking about engaging students, faculty, community partners, maybe we can add in that dimension before I go over to Bill.
Well, I'll try and mesh it all together in terms of both questions. You know, a lot of the bigger collaborative projects that I've worked on, you know, they really start out about 18 months before you actually receive any money. So engaging students and community partners that early in the game could be very frustrating for them. So I would say in cases like that, it's important to bring people in at the appropriate time. That said, you know, I love bringing students on projects, and at least even for EPSCoR, we have, quote, an onboarding process. Brittany has developed a short video that sort of introduces every students and even new faculty and postdocs to the project and sort of gets everybody a basic foundation to start from. This could also, something like that could be used for community members. Very often though, in terms of bringing community and members and other partners on board, let's say from the national labs and so on and so forth, that will have a smaller role. We found that it's important to at least have the broad outline, at least in terms of what you want to do as part of your research. So you can, again, target specific individuals or groups that you know that you want to be a part of it. And then again, bring them on as early as possible is useful. Oftentimes you want to mention them in the proposal itself. In some cases, you want to include their CVs. So again, in that case, the earlier the better, but it's better to do it when you actually have something fleshed out and you can, you know, give them something tangible to poke holes at or say, hey, yes, we're really interested in that, as opposed to getting in there at the very beginning of the sausage making process, which could prove to be somewhat frustrating and possibly disenfranchise important community partners that you actually want to engage with.
Thank you. Mindy or Mark, do you want to add anything with regard to engaging community partners in the team research process? Sort of when, how, best practices?
I'll also add that I don't think there's a one size fits all by any means, because it really depends on a couple of key factors. One is the type of organization. It is really different if you're talking about like a partner over at the national labs versus working with a tribal community or working with a small nonprofit or something like that, because yeah, the bandwidth's different, and you know, their experience working with like those timelines that Bill is pointing out is really different. And it also really depends on the nature of the project and the funding agency, because for several of my projects, like Mindy was talking about the work that we've done up on the Rio Chama, that was very bottom up, grassroots, and the whole projects were conceived with community partners, and then we tried to find ways to pay for it. So they were involved from the very, I mean, they were the drivers of it. Others, it makes a lot of sense not to pull people in until their role is clear and you don't want to waste their time. And like Bill said, you can disenfranchise people because they feel like you're just having a bunch of meetings and it's not going anywhere. So I think it's really case specific, depending on the partner type, the funding type, what your vision is for that work.
Thank you, Mark. Anything to add to that, Mindy?
No, I think that's good.
All right. Well, so we have a few minutes left. One of the questions I wanted to get to here was asking about some challenges or obstacles that you've faced in teamwork and how you overcame those. So a broad question, but I wonder if anyone has anything in particular that comes to mind.
I can give two. One is a lot of teams have difficulty in terms of really nailing down what specific activities and research components need to be tackled to address some grand vision that the team has. And I found a great solution to that is the Kellogg Logic Model Development Guide. So it provides a logical way of both determining what your team will do in order to tackle some component of this research, as well as communicating what you will be doing to the rest of the team members as well. And this is through the Kellogg Foundation, which is serial, Kellogg. It's easy to find on Google and download it. That plus the thing that I showed earlier, those are the two Bibles that have used for every research project. The second big challenge, and it's not always easy to deal with, is political interference by administration. This can be a real challenge. I've had major battles with department chairs, deans, even vice presidents who insisted that I do something a particular way, like so-and-so really needs to be involved in your project. And again, dealing with that is a really challenging issue. You have to determine ways around. Sometimes I've had to go to the president of the university in order to straighten out a department chair or an errant dean. So Mark's experiences, he said, it always been very positive, but I've been at UNM for 20 years now, and not everyone has a collaborative team science mindset. So again, I think all of the people on this call are probably the opposite of that and very much interested in collaboration. So hopefully you won't experience that, but if you do, again, think through the best approach for dealing with that. Maybe consult some mentors and others that have had similar experiences and find out a way to sort of get around that particular obstacle.
Thank you, Bill. Mindy or Mark?
I'll just say real quickly that I think sometimes people can make this mistake of organizing too quickly and chasing after a specific proposal and not giving themselves enough time, and then getting really disappointed when that proposal is not funded and then just giving up. And I think that a lot of times it takes more than one crack at something to be successful. There was this really wonderful, we wrote an article, Mark and I and a bunch of other folks, Chris Lippett, called 5 Ways Institutions Can Support Interdisciplinary Work Before Tenure. And in that, there's a story about a team up in Idaho. Took them, I think, 6 tries to get an IGERT proposal and then a PhD NSF program funded. So 6 tries to get a really wonderful program finally off the ground. So a lot of times it takes multiple swings before you get a hit. But if you put the right team together and don't necessarily orient towards necessarily any individual proposal, but instead towards the idea, that's the best way to do it. So I think that that's something I would say is don't necessarily orient towards just one specific proposal and then not give yourselves enough time. Organize towards the idea and know that it will take time sometimes before something comes to fruition.
Wonderful, thank you. And we only have about a minute left, but I do want to give Mark the last word here.
I'll always take the last word, but I'll just use it just to close out, because I know, like everyone, probably has on Zoom at 10 o'clock, like I do. So just a huge thank you for this opportunity. We need more opportunities like this to share. And I wish I could have heard from everyone else on the line here today, because I'm sure everyone has their experiences and we're all trying to figure this out together.
Another huge thanks to our panelists. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you to everyone who's contributed fantastic questions to make this a great conversation. I do want to make just a quick plug for the Faculty Research Development Office. If there's anybody who wants to talk through collaborative strategies or how to build your team, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to have those conversations. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of the Team Research Symposium. Thank you.